welcome everybody to today's webinar. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Anthea Maris and I'm the Project Director for the Construction Inclusion Coalition. And for those of you who don't know, the Construction Inclusion Coalition is a group of companies from all within this, at the moment, the building materials, builders merchant sector, who've all made a commitment to work together to improve diversity and inclusion across the industry. And the reason you're here is because your companies are members of the Construction Inclusion Coalition, and therefore you've been invited to attend a number of, this is one of a number of workshops we run for member businesses. Some of you know me quite well, and some of you I know will be completely new to this topic, and some of you are probably attending because what I've said I'll do, and I will after this webinar, I'll obviously share the recording, but I'm also happy to share any of the presenter notes and any of the exercises. So if people want to take this and roll it out in their own organisations, you're most welcome to do that. And also on the call, we've got Ruth from Cortexa, and Ruth is going to take today's webinar and turn it into an e-learning module. I can see you've just come off on screen, Ruth, so welcome. And Ruth already turned one of our workshops on microaggressions into an e-learning module. We're going to turn this one into an e-learning module. So if anyone thinks the content's good and you're thinking, I'd like something that I could roll out wider within my business, talk to myself or to Ruth afterwards, and we'll tell you how you can go about doing that. Okay, so let's get started. Hopefully you can all see the slides. So just a bit of housekeeping. Can I ask you, and I think you've probably done this already, turn your microphone off unless you are speaking, because it just avoids any background noise from everybody else. But please do contribute to the discussion. You can come off mute, you can use the chat box, and if you come off mute, just raise your hand. And at the bottom of your screen, if you're not familiar with Google Meet, you'll see a number of icons, including a hand icon, and that's the one you use just to raise your hand. And as I've said before, this session will be recorded and shared on the Member Resources Library, which is open to anyone who's a member of the Construction Inclusion Coalition. So what are we going to do today? Well, today we've got an hour together, or 55 minutes now. We're going to look at what is unconscious bias, and this is an introduction, so we're not going to go into loads of detail, but the idea here is to make sure everybody here by the end of the session knows what unconscious bias is, knows some examples of unconscious bias, and we're going to explore some real life examples and some real life consequences of unconscious bias, and then we're going to talk about what we can all do in our roles as individuals as well to mitigate unconscious bias, both at work but also in our private lives as well. It's not just something that affects us at work. So that's what we're going to do over the next 55 minutes. So I'm going to start with a little bit of an icebreaker, and what I'm going to do in a minute is show you and put an image on the screen, and I want you just to have a look at this image and just notice what stands out for you. So there's a number of images here, but which image are you drawn to? Just notice that, and either put your hand up and I'll come to you, or put in the chat box which image you're drawn to and why are you drawn to that image. So I'm going to just give you a second to look at the picture, and I'm going to open the chat box so I can see people chatting. So either come off mute and tell me what you're drawn to, or just type something in the chat box. So Anna's put bottom right. You've drawn to it because it's colourful. What are other people drawn to?
I've drawn to the bottom right as well, Anthea, and
yeah?
also because it's multicultural and it's inclusion with everybody.
Yep. Yeah. Mike, the bright colours at the bottom. Yeah. What else have we got? The same. Ruth, bottom left because it looks like what I do. Is that the? Hang on, I'm going to let somebody in. Sorry, let me just let somebody in. Middle right because it's celebrating a win with the trophy. Ruth's, training, leading. Ruth's saying she's drawn to the bottom right because it looks like what she's doing, training, leading. Glenn, the lady with the headscarf in the top middle. Do you know why you're drawn to that, Glenn?
I just think it's a real conversational topic in society at the moment. You know, there's lots of countries talking about banning, allowing, face coverings and things like that, and it seems very topical.
Topical, yeah. Okay. Anyone else drawn to something different on that screen? Okay, well, the point of me sort of showing you that and getting you to think about what you're drawn to is that different people will be drawn to different images for different reasons. I mean, Chris has just said he's drawn to the middle left because it's unusual to see a wheelchair user in stock images. And to be honest, Chris, I don't think I've ever noticed that there was a wheelchair user until you just said that. So the point I'm trying to show here is that we get shown a page of images. We all get drawn to different images for different reasons, and this is an example of our brains filtering information based on our background, our cultural environment, and our personal experiences, and things that are topical or things that are important to us. And different people will be drawn to different things, and every time I look at this image I can see something different. So just as a bit of an introduction to the way our brains work, is that we don't all see everything, we filter information. So I'm going to ask you to look at another image now, and I want you to tell me, either tell me in the chat box or tell me, shout out, what do you see in this image? And for a second, just let everybody look before you shout what you see. But once you've had a chance to look at it, maybe now, if you could shout out what you can see from that image. So lots of frogs, yeah, frogs. Ah, Kelly can see a horse. Yep, frog, toad, and a horse head. Yep. So can all of you, it looks like all of you can see the frog, but can all of you see the horse? Yeah. So let me just turn the image on its head for a minute. Does that help those that couldn't see the horse now? So what was the frog's eyes and mouth is now the horse's nose and mouth, actually. So and what was looked like ripples in the water is actually the horse's mane. So again, the purpose of showing you that is that we all see things differently, and again, it's because of the way our brain works and the way we filter information. So we can be looking at exactly the same picture, but we see things differently. And for the rest of this webinar, I want to encourage you just to recognize that we all see things differently, and I want you therefore just to slow down your thinking, suspend your judgments, turn off that little voice in your head that's constantly running a commentary about what's going on, and just be curious about the session. Emily says the sound's gone. Can everybody else hear me? Yes. So hopefully she'll log in and log back on again, because everyone else can hear. Right. Okay. Let's move on. So what is unconscious bias? Let's just do a little bit of introduction. So unconscious bias, it's also known as something called implicit bias, refers to our automatic mental shortcuts that we use to process information and make decisions. And this happens outside our conscious awareness. And this processing of information is shaped by our environment, our backgrounds, what's in the media, our cultures, and our past experiences. And bias is a normal part of our human brain function. And this is because our brains process about 11 million bits of information per second. And so it has to use mental shortcuts to filter and sort and make sense of the information it receives. And our brains rely on patterns from past experiences to help us interpret those 11 million bits of information per second. And as a result of this processing, a result of the normal human brain function, this can have a big influence on our decisions and actions. And when this translates into our work lives, it can affect the way we make decisions at work. It can affect our relationships at work and how we interact with other people. And unconscious bias shows up in our behavior and in the language we use. And the point I wanted to really make is, because it is unconscious, we're not even aware that we've got biases, but we all have them, and we can't all alleviate them, but we can learn to reduce the impact of them. But that takes a bit of work, because any behavioural change, as you'll know, if you've been trying to learn a new hobby, to lose weight, to improve physical exercise, it always takes practice and reflection and ongoing practice. And so unconscious bias, we can improve our unconscious bias and make it less prevalent, but it takes a lot of work. So what we're going to do now is, I want you to read, well, I'm going to read this dilemma. I'm going to read you this dilemma, and I just want you to just notice your reactions as I read this out to you. It's on the screen as well. The surgeon's dilemma. A father and his son are involved in a horrific car crash, and the man died at the scene. But when the child arrived at the hospital and was rushed into the operating theatre, the surgeon pulled away and said, "I can't operate on this boy. He is my son." So just notice your reactions on that. What I'm going to do now is a bit of an experiment, is I'm going to try and do a little poll. So I am going to, in a minute, in the bottom corner of your screen should come up that that I'm about to launch a poll. So and I'm going to press launch now. So hopefully it will come up, and I'm going to ask you, the question I'm asking you, the poll is, which of these best explains your initial reactions to the surgeon's dilemma? So the slide's going to show the questions that I'm going to put in this poll, and I'm going to ask you to select which one of these 5 options reflects your initial reaction to that dilemma. Right, I'm going to launch the poll now, and hopefully you'll all be able to see it. Can you see the poll? Right. So if you can, Dawn, stick it in the poll, and Alpa, stick your answer into the poll. Yeah. Fantastic. You're all having a go at that. And hopefully you can all see the responses in the poll as well. Yeah? You can see that we've got 2 votes for I was confused. I couldn't see how the surgeon could be the boy's parent. 10 votes for quickly realised it was the boy's mother. 3 votes for the thought the boy had 2 dads, etc. Okay, so this, yeah, and some people may have seen this example before. It's a well-known example. So yeah, if you know it before, then it's not going to have the same impact. But the point we're making here is just how we can initially make some decisions based on our unconscious bias. And a couple of people were confused. They thought, how could the surgeon be the boy's parent? A couple of people thought the boy had 2 dads. Some people have seen it before, but quite often people are initially confused by this. And this is a result of, again, of our unconscious bias that normally, or not normally today, but in the past, the surgeon's role was assumed to be a man's role. So it's a common unconscious bias around gender roles. So our brain automatically, when we're listening to a story, that forms an impression in our mind that the surgeon is a man, and that's built from what we've learned as children, from our experiences from the media, etc. So now I want to show you another example, and this is a real world example from March 2024. So this is a really relevant example. Now, if you've been on my microaggressions webinar, you will have seen this before, but it's such, I'm going to end the poll now. It's such a good example. I thought it would be worth sharing for people who have joined this one. So it's the form of a little video. So I'm just going to ask you to watch the video and just sort of notice what's going on in the video and just notice your reaction to it. Okay.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the Airline Pilots Association International. My name is Laura Hayner, and I'm a Minnesota resident and a Minneapolis-based pilot for Delta Airlines.
Ms. Hayner, is that correct?
Yes.
So can you tell me what a typical work week looks like for you as a stewardess? How does
I'm a first officer for Delta.
Pardon me?
I'm a pilot for Delta.
I'm sorry, I apologize. I don't know why I said that. I'm so sorry.
Our schedules vary. We get a schedule a month out for the whole month.
Okay. So what did people notice about their thoughts as they watched that video? Anyone want to pipe up for me? Any thoughts on what was going on there?
Yeah, I think he was being quite dismissive. He absolutely heard she was a pilot.
You thought that, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do other people think?
He just seen female in front of him and just assumed that was the role of a female.
Yeah, absolutely.
That she'd introduced herself as a pilot.
Yep. Chris, you put your hands up. Chris?
Yeah, I think it's just how pathetic his apology is. Like, it's so disingenuous.
Yeah.
It should have been, he probably should have paused, apologised genuinely, re-asked the question, recognising that as a first officer. So, it's just, I think almost the apology is worse than the mistake.
Yeah.
I agree. Totally agree.
Paris, you put your hand up.
Yeah, no, I just thought he wasn't listening to her, so he looked at her and he made an assumption based on his unconscious biases. The fact that she'd given directly opposite information just didn't register with him, and I think he was I think he was embarrassed and sort of tried to dismiss it in his response, but that makes things worse because it's dismissive of her, and that. But I think that was the motivation behind his shoddy apology.
Yeah. But every time I watch it, I feel quite uncomfortable watching that because his embarrassment makes me feel uncomfortable. But the reality is that this takes place in society today. You know, we still it will be his unconscious bias, and maybe the way he handled it, he's got to learn to handle it more differently. But the fact it happens, it will happen, and you know, these scenarios will continue to happen because it's going on unconsciously, that he's just looking at her and thinking you must be a stewardess, you can't be a pilot. And it's still happening today, and it just illustrates that even in 2024, that, you know, somebody like a senator who's been recorded for the whole world to see now, can make an error based on an assumption that pilots should be men, and not accepting that women can do the same jobs as men. So I guess just to reflect that this issue of unconscious bias is still really, really prevalent in now. You know, it's only a year ago since this happened. And unconscious bias, a conscious bias can influence recruitment and promotion decisions. It can influence, you know, how people get medical treatment. It can influence how teachers interact in classrooms, how decisions are made by the police and by the courts, and can impact everyday social interactions and social decisions. It's around us everywhere, and then people who believe in, you know, equality and fairness and diversity and inclusion, even those of us who believe in that, and those of us on this call, will act in a biased way without even realizing it. And I know myself, and at the end of your intro, I'll tell you about some implicit bias tests that you can go and take. I know that I've got biases, and you can't undo your biases. You just got to be aware that they're there, because then you can think twice before you speak, or think twice before you act. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is just look at some common types of bias that we might see in the workplace.
Good afternoon,
Let me just go through. Okay, so there's 5 on here that I just want to run through today. The first one, we've just seen a bit of an example of gender bias, but gender or age bias. So this is where we favour one gender or one age group over another based on stereotypes. So assuming the surgeon must be a man, assuming the pilot must be a man, assuming a nurse is going to be a female, or, for example, assuming an older worker lacks leadership potential, so shouldn't be considered for promotion, or considering maybe an older worker can't adapt to new technology, would be an example of age bias. Then we've got affinity bias, and this is where we it's also known as similarity bias. It's where we prefer people who are like ourselves because they've got similar backgrounds, interests, or experiences, and we've all got affinity bias. We all favour people who are like ourselves. You can't not have it. We have it. An example here might be hiring a candidate for a job because they went to the same university you went to, or they work for a similar company that you worked for in the past, even though another candidate is more qualified for the role. So hiring someone that you know over and above somebody who's more qualified for the role is an example of affinity bias. And then we've got confirmation bias. So this is where we tend to seek out or interpret information in a way that confirms our pre-existing beliefs. Confirmation bias, an example would be noticing mistakes from an employee that you already believe is careless. So noticing mistakes from an employee who you already believe is careless, but overlooking exactly the same mistakes in somebody else. So that's an example of confirmation bias, that you form an opinion and you look for more information to confirm your pre-existing beliefs. And then we've got the halo and horns effect. So the halo effect is allowing one positive trait to influence your overall opinion of a person, and the horns is allowing a negative trait to influence your overall opinion of a person. And some examples here, that assuming that someone is good at their job just because they're confident and they're well spoken is an example of the halo effect. And judging someone as being incompetent because they're late once, even though their overall performance is good, would be an example of the horns effect. And then finally on this slide, the primacy and recency effect. And so this is where either we rely too heavily on the first, which is primacy, or the last piece of information we've received when making a decision. So for example, letting a candidate's initial salary expectations skew your perception of their market value or competence in a role, or again, this is where, in an interview process, allowing first impressions to influence your view of the candidate before you've heard the evidence they provided in an interview, or letting the last piece of information you hear about a candidate influence your decision. So these are some common biases that we see every day occurring in the workplace. So we're going to have a look at a couple of real world examples now, and then we're going to break into some breakout groups to look at some examples in groups. So let me just what I want you to do when we go into breakout groups is I'm going to give you, and I have sent people via email a copy of all the scenarios. So hopefully someone in your group will have a copy of that, and I will put it into the chat box, but I know not everybody can access because you're not all on Google. So an example is a factory manager is selecting a shift production advisor for the night shift. Two employees have similar experiences, but one has worked with the manager previously and shares the similar hobbies. The manager instinctively trusts this person that they've worked with previously and therefore decides to promote them. So what I want us to discuss is why does it matter? What do we do about it, and why does it happen? So just really like to hear from a few people. Why does it matter that a manager chooses to promote someone who they previously know and share similar hobbies? Would someone like to just jump up and just say why does that matter?
May not be the right candidate.
Absolutely, they may not be the right candidate. Yep. Any other reasons?
Conflict of interest.
Conflict of interest, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so absolutely. They may not be the best candidate for the role, and actually it limits the career development for people who are less familiar to the manager. So if you always, promote people or give the most interesting tasks to people who are, then you're limiting career development for other people in your team. So what could we do about it? What could we do in that scenario to avoid that happening? Any suggestions?
Have a second opinion. So put it to another manager to do a second interview.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. Involve somebody else in the decision making. What else could we do?
Yeah.
Criteria.
Yeah, set some criteria, and I see we've got here hold a standard recruitment process.
That's
absolutely.
what I was going to say. Yeah,
absolutely. So if we use objective criteria to make a decision, maybe an interview in this case, or maybe just even sat down your criteria and look at the CVs and involve others in the decision making, you can eliminate that bias. And then, and why does this happen? This is an example of one of the biases I just told you about. Which bias do you think this is an example of? So it's an example of affinity bias. So again, we favour, yes, thank you, Laura. It's we favour people who are similar to ourselves. Whether we like it or not, we are drawn to people who are similar to ourselves. And if you think about, you go into a big conference and a networking event, and you think about who are you drawn to, who do you go and talk to? You go and talk to people that people who are similar to yourselves. We don't frequently do we go deliberately and go and find someone who's completely different that we don't know. We have this human tendency to favour people who are more like us or who we know. So we've got to watch out for affinity bias. Okay, so that's the example. So what I'm going to ask you to do now, I'm going to put people into breakout groups. I'm going to do 5 breakout groups. I think we've got 27 people on the call. 5 breakout groups, and I'm going to while I'm in a minute, I'm going to set the breakout groups up. So when you go into your breakout groups, you're going to look at the scenario, and I'm going to put the scenario on the screen in a minute. So if you want, you can take a screenshot, or you can use your camera to take a picture if you haven't got the email I've just sent this morning. But I'm going to ask you in your groups just for 10 minutes just to look at your scenario, discuss why it matters, what to do about it, and why it happens, and then nominate one person in your group to feed back to the main group. Now, if someone in the group has got a real life example of another example of bias that they'd like to discuss instead, that's absolutely fine. So if someone's thinking, oh, I've got a much better example that I'd like to share with the group, do that instead. So these are the breakout scenarios. I am just, while you read those, I'm just going to go into the breakout rooms and set up the breakout group. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like us just to go through those scenarios and hear from somebody in each group just to answer the question. So let's take scenario 1. So group 1, and for everybody else won't have probably thought much about the scenario, so let me just read it out. So the scenario is a site supervisor automatically assigns a female worker to handle admin tasks such as ordering materials and coordinating schedules, whilst assuming that the male worker should handle heavy machinery and field work. So someone from group 1, why does this matter? Why is it important not to do that?
Hello.
Hello.
But we thought, I mean, why does it matter? I mean, obviously, there's a lot of reasons why it matters. Because this might not be a good skills match for the people. You might have the wrong people doing the wrong tasks. Not good for operational effectiveness. It's not good to have people delegated to specific areas. You want a sort of a multi-skilled workforce. Not taking it into account anything about how the individuals feel, how being assigned to tasks which may not be an ideal skills match for them makes them feel. And then if they were to make an assumption that was based on their sex, then there's likely to be another, further emotional feelings around that. But we talked about what you need to do is, when you're making these decisions, they need to be made. You need to be making them transparently and through a sensible judgment. You need to look at the skills of your team. You need to delegate based on the skills. Your knowledge of the individuals and their skills might be that you split it in. It might, by coincidence, be split by sex, but you need to be doing it based on people's skills, not on assumptions. So, clear process, skills matrices, ensuring people, have the opportunity to develop their skills, and also what people want to do in the future as well. And then we talked a little bit about why it happens towards the end, but much less. We were just talking about sort of quick decisions. People, these are unconscious biases at play. These aren't people genuine. I don't believe, in my professional capacity, these aren't people genuinely thinking there's no way that woman could do those tasks. It's just well, I've got these 2 tasks. That's probably a better fit for him and a better fit for her. So they make those decisions without real consideration, rather than actually making sexist judgments consciously.
Brilliant.
As well, and our group's opinion.
No, absolutely. So it's based on unconscious gender bias about jobs that society has coded masculine, and women are better at housekeeping than doing heavy machinery and field work. So it's just it's unconscious. It's not deliberate. It's unconscious, and it's probably based on previous society's expectations. Fantastic. Does anyone else want to add anything else to that example, or can we move on to the next one? Okay, that looks good. So scenario 2, a recruiter skims through job applications and without realizing it sets aside CVs with names that seem unfamiliar or are hard to pronounce, assuming they might not be a good cultural fit. So someone from group 2, can you come on off mute and tell us why is that important, what to do about it, and why it happens? Who we got from group 2? Group, and I can't see the groups anymore. So
I can go. I'm happy to go.
Oh, thanks, Chris.
Yeah, so why it matters, I think we said it matters for the potential employee and the employer. So you're narrowing your talent pool, which is in itself bad for the employer, because there's potentially lots of relevant candidates, maybe the best candidate that has been sort of just excluded from the start. But also it matters for those potential employees, because obviously they're sort of being discriminated purely based on their name, if that's the only sort of identifier of their background and so on. The why it happened, we said potentially lots of reasons. It could be something as simple as an embarrassment about bringing that person back and getting their name wrong. So not wanting to have an conversation where you ring someone back, you pronounce their name wrong, and that sort of gets that conversation off to the best start. Easy just not to have that conversation in the first place. But we also said it might be something to do with a sort of misinterpretation of what is meant by a good cultural fit, because cultural fit can obviously mean culture of the business, the sort of the values of the business, but it might also mean culture and ethnicity and background. So it might be that recruiter has misinterpreted what is meant by cultural fit. And the leadership of that business might be clear that we want a diverse talent pool, providing everyone sort of has these sort of ambitions and whatever. In terms of what to do, I think obviously some training for that recruitment team, not just that individual, but on on unconscious bias broadly. Something similar to obviously to this really would help understand what is wrong with that, but also just about, it is okay to get someone's name wrong on a phone call. It might be, please correct me if I get this wrong. Am I speaking to? Or even saying, is there another name or an abbreviation you prefer I use when we're talking, just to avoid that.
Okay, thanks very much, Chris. Anyone want to add anything on that? That's good. I mean, just a couple of other things there. That we advocate these days is where possible, use blind CVs for screenings to remove names, gender and age, and focus your screening on skills and experience. And it's just the other thing, I guess, to really point out here then, if I guess two things. There is research that people with white sounding names are nearly twice as likely to get invited to interview for jobs than people with ethnic sounding names. So just be aware this is happening out there, and be very, very careful if you're recruiting not to let that happen. And one of the reasons that to be very, very careful is this: if you do discriminate someone on the basis of name, it can be race discrimination, which is unlawful. It's not just unconscious bias here, it's actual unlawful discrimination. Lina, did you want to say something?
I did, Anthea. Yeah. I've actually seen this firsthand as well in a previous company, whereby exactly like the scenario states, in terms of putting aside names that people can't pronounce, and it was a case of, how are we going to say that over the tannoy? Are we going to be able to pronounce that correctly? Whereas actually, there's times where I look at applicants as well and I can't pronounce the name. You just pick the phone up and you say to them, I'm really sorry, I'm not sure how you pronounce your name. It just starts like that. Yeah. There's no need to disregard them just because you can't pronounce the name, but actually all their qualifications meet up with what you need. So
yeah, thanks very much. Thanks. Okay, let's move on to scenario number 3. So group number 3, a company is adopting a new project management software. A younger employee suggests a digital tool for tracking job progress, but the manager dismisses it, assuming older workers won't be able to use it effectively. So group number 3, why does it matter what to do? Why does this happen?
Hello. So yeah, we obviously, this is about assuming that kind of people can't adapt, or they can't pick up new things, or they don't want to do that. Obviously that matters because you're limiting yourself there in terms of your development, your progression, you're kind of moving forwards. You would never kind of get anything done or get better at anything if you have this kind of mindset that, we can't do that because they won't be able to use it. You're making a generic assumption there. So the things you could do is obviously go out and get feedback from all of your employees in terms of what they think about the new software, what concerns they have, if any, and then obviously do some good training. Make sure you've got a good training program. Obviously you could have some champions of the system, some people who are really well versed in how it works, and they can be there for questions or to support those that maybe are struggling, but that might not necessarily be anything to do with age. So yeah, don't kind of pigeonhole the older people within the company to say it's only these people that are going to have a problem with this. So yeah, age bias, making assumptions based on a characteristic, but thinking, either they can't do it or they don't want to do it. And then we had some conversations about kind of elderly people that we're familiar with, and actually they can learn these new technologies. It might take a bit more time, but just have a bit of patience and dedicate a bit of time and investment into it, and they can definitely do it. And also it's not just to do with age. It can be anyone that doesn't. It's more about change, how different it is. It's not necessarily that it's technology and they're older. It's just a change in doing things. So yeah.
Brilliant. Sounds like you had a good discussion, Laura. Brilliant. Yeah. You covered everything on my notes. So fantastic. Anyone else want to add anything on that, or can we move on to scenario number 4? Right. Okay, scenario number 4. In a meeting, a customer only looks and speaks to the men on your team. Who's from group number 4 going to tell us why it matters, what to do, what happens? Go ahead.
So I've had a lot of first-hand experience of this. So being an academy manager for a construction academy and being the bricklaying tutor, people were astounded that it was me and that I could teach bricklaying and manage an academy. My surname's Kirk, so everybody presumed that was my first name and my last name was Kelly. So everybody that turned up, especially male clients, were, I'm looking for Kirk. And I'm like, oh no, that's me. Oh no, I'm looking for the man that runs the academy. And I'm like, no, that's me. I'm the woman that runs the academy. And I'd get that quite a lot. But then do we presume it's only a man that's doing it? So we said our first thought was, are we presuming that the customer is a man and will only speak to the men on the team, or is the customer a woman and has that better rapport with men than she does with women?
Mm.
It matters because people can feel really singled out.
Yeah.
You lose the option of having people give to a meeting and provide information and collaborate with each other.
Yeah.
I call it out if appropriate.
Yeah.
I've sat on interviews where I've been interviewing, and it tends to be younger, and it's been IT people sitting on IT interviews. They felt really uncomfortable talking to a woman, and as we talked about it, as they're coming out of the COVID generation and it's their first kind of interviews, they may not have had that interaction with a woman and been talking to them, so they can feel really uncomfortable doing that. So it's chatting to them at the end. Why it happens, several different reasons, perception. People can be nervous about speaking to somebody that they don't feel they've got that rapport with. So if I sit in an IT interview and they've got the 2 IT people there and then me as the recruiter, they've got that affinity with the IT people. But maybe they're like, oh, it's a girl and it's a recruiter.
Yeah, brilliant. So it's a bit of affinity bias, and it can be performance bias as well, where we assume that women are less competent than men in some roles. Just in terms of what to do, I mean, if you notice that happening in a meeting, what you can do is you personally can take an action to bring the women into the conversation by highlighting, X would be great to answer this. She's an expert on the topic. So if you observe it, you can influence by just bringing the person who's been excluded into the meeting, and then maybe picking it up with the person afterwards. But again, we're assuming here that the customer's a man. It might not be a man, it might be a female customer. So interesting example there. Fantastic. Any other comments on that one before we move on to scenario number 5? Okay, so who's got scenario number 5? It's where you decide to mentor someone because they remind you of yourself. What were people's thoughts about why does that matter?
Anthea, it's Rachel. I'll respond for our team. We had a really interesting conversation, and actually we all jumped to the conclusion to begin with that this was a bad thing. So we then went round the circle in terms of the conversation and ended up saying it might not be a bad thing. Let's not assume that it is. So we thought that was quite interesting when we challenged ourselves at the end of the conversation. From a unconscious bias, it's probably from an affinity point of view. So you see something in that person that you like, they're similar to you. In terms of why it matters, possibly, but not necessarily, you might not be the best mentor for that mentee. You might not be the person who's going to give them what they need. You might be less likely to challenge them if there's certain things that you see in them that you see in yourself. And actually, as a mentee or a mentor, it's just as important in terms of what you're getting out of that relationship. So are you being challenged as that mentor and therefore adding the most value as possible? In terms of what you could do differently, actually make sure that you've got a good selection criteria or competency-based criteria as to how you're matching the mentors and the mentees. Highly unlikely that the mentor is actually doing the selection themselves to say, I'd really like to mentor Anthea, thanks very much. So if there's other people providing that independence and providing that structure, then hopefully you're going to get to the best possible outcome, which could be those 2 people being together, or it could be a different outcome. So I use the example of the work that we did on the CIC mentoring, where we felt like we were X factor and matching people up, but actually we had a criteria that we were working against and information that we'd been given, and none of the mentors were actually part of that conversation. So it was being done by a separate group of people, wasn't it?
Yeah, great. And this is an interesting one because I raised this one before and I got a bit of a reaction to it. So it's interesting you had a good conversation, because the reason why I threw it in is because in our world there are more male leaders currently in our organisation. So it's more, if we only mentor people like ourselves, more men are going to be mentored and less women are going to be mentored, or minority groups. So that's the reason I threw it in. But so I guess it's an encouragement if people are white men and they're mentoring, is to think, could I mentor someone who's like myself, but also maybe somebody who's completely different, to allow people from underrepresented groups to get that mentoring. But actually, if you're a woman or from a minority group, you might want to mentor someone who's like yourself, because you might want, again, they tend to be under mentored. So it's just an interesting one just to be aware of that.
I think the other thing to add to that, and I am conscious of time, is that actually we don't have it at the moment, but I know lots of businesses have in other industries reverse mentoring. Actually having people from maybe some minority groups or female, etc., actually mentoring upwards within the business can actually help and shape and influence people's thinking and approaches as well, which can only be a good thing going forward.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Right, we are nearly out of time. So the last one, we didn't have a group, but so I thought I'll just quickly run through this one with you. So this is a senior manager, is highly charismatic, well-spoken, and because of their confidence, their ideas are rarely questioned, even when there's little supporting data. Meanwhile, a quieter colleague struggles to get their ideas heard, even though they've got well-researched insights. So this may well happen in our environment, and it might be, why it matters is because we might not be, hearing from that well-informed colleagues. So we might limit the number of insights we get and the different perspectives and the innovation, and it might mean that a quieter member of the group stops trying to speak up and thinks I'm not going to be heard here, so I'll go and work somewhere else. What to do? Always, be curious, involve quieter people in data making and in decision making. And just be aware that just because someone's highly charismatic and well spoken doesn't mean they are the expert. And why does it happen? It's an example of the halo effect, where someone who's charismatic, well spoken, people have an overall positive view of that person, and just to be aware of it. Just one final slide to go through with you is that in terms of what we all can do to mitigate our own unconscious bias, the first thing to do is we can slow down our decision making and think before we make a decision, think before we speak, think, have we involved everybody? Am I maybe making some judgments here? So slow down our thinking. We can broaden our perspective taking, so seek out contradictory views, engage with people from different backgrounds and get their views, increase our interactions with people who are from diverse groups. So in that networking room I mentioned earlier, go and speak to someone who's not like ourselves and start to have a coffee with or talk to people who are less like ourselves and broaden our view of the world. And when we do decision making, use objective criteria. And when we make decisions, yes, you can have a copy of the slides. We'll share the why behind your decisions. And then one final thing you can do is build your awareness of your own unconscious bias. And I'll send these slides out to all of you straight after today. But there is a website here. This is the Harvard Implicit Bias website. And if you go to this website, there are about 12 different unconscious bias tests that you can take on yourself, and it is eye-opening. So if you've never done it and you want to see where your biases are, if you think you haven't got any biases, try some of these tests, because I'm telling you do. So if you want to educate yourself and find out what your biases are, have a go at these tests. They're free. If you want to read a book, this book here, A Judgment-Free Guide to Diversity and Inclusion, it says it's for straight white men, but it's a brilliant book. I recommend that to everybody. But you can increase your learning of unconscious bias and by listening to podcasts, watching TED Talks. If anyone wants to recommend any recommendations, talk to me. But go and do these tests and maybe read a book and continue to attend sessions like this when they come up. Continue to attend them, and we can all learn to unlearn some of the unconscious bias that we all have. So I'm conscious that we are out of time now. So I just wanted to thank you all for your participation. I will send the slides. If you want presenter notes as well, actually they'll be in the presenter notes will be in the slides, but if you want any of the other materials, let me know, and we will be sharing the recording on the member resources. So if you want a link to the recording, let me know as well. Thank you very much, everybody, and hope to see you at another session sometime soon.